CAM, talking about earliest memories in the saddle, because new research from British Cycling suggests children from the poorest families are less likely to know how to ride a bike. The sports governing body found 97% of children from better off backgrounds can cycle, compared with 86% of youngsters from the least well off. Now that means that there are 350,000 children potentially who would like to cycle, but currently can't. Some familiar names have been sharing their earliest memories from bikes. Here's the screenwriter and novelist Frank Cottrell-Boyce.
I did not learn to ride a bike till I was 20 because when we were little, we lived in a flat right in the middle of Liverpool. Then we moved to a lovely new housing estate. And honestly, it was like Centre Park. Everybody had a bike. And that Christmas, my brother and I just assumed we would get bikes. We thought it was like the price of admission for living there. And when we woke up, there were no bikes. There was fuzzy felt. And from then on, I felt it was like embarrassing that someone my age, which was like 8, couldn't ride a bike. And every year it got more embarrassing. And then I got a place at university. I got up at 5 o'clock in the morning so that no one could see me, got on my dad's bike and just set off, falling off, until suddenly I was flying. And I still say, the moment you learn to ride a bike is the best feeling in the world.
That's so lovely. Frank Cottrell-Boyce. Emily Cherry with us, the CEO of Bikeability, based in Cambridge. Hi, Emily.
Hello, good morning, Dottie. Well, I'm not sure I'm going to agree with recommending learning to cycle via dream work, but what a great story.
Isn't it fantastic and fascinating as well? How did you learn, Emily?
I learnt with my parents, so I grew up in a very rural area down in South. We now live in Cambridgeshire, but my parents taught me, and like Frank, I remember falling off, scraping your knees, doing those things. But it is that life skill that once you've learnt to cycle, it unlocks transport independence and just gives you that skill for life, which is just fantastic. And we're very passionate about cycling and everything that we do.
This research by British Cycling suggesting there's a gap between, well, essentially a wealth gap, better off kids, more likely to be able to ride a bike. Do you see that in Cambridgeshire?
We definitely do see this in Cambridgeshire and across the entire country. So I visited a school in Peterborough about 2 years ago. One of the big reasons why this is happening is that access to cycles is really dropped through the floor. We've got 1 in 4 children aged 5 to 10 don't have access to a cycle. We've got children's new cycle sales driven by cost of living has absolutely gone through the floor. And I remember visiting a school in Peterborough a couple of years ago, and about 2/3 of an entire class didn't have access to a cycle. Now, we've tried to fix some of that. We've got fleets of cycles, we call them, that can go out so that no child who wants to take on Bikeability doesn't have that opportunity to then get that life skill and learn to cycle. But the thing that breaks my heart, of course, is that we have to take that bike back at the end of the course and they don't have the opportunity to ongoingly cycle. And that's what we want to do more as a charity.
I mean, it feels like a real shame if there's kids without bikes, because there must be so many other kids who are growing out of their bikes. I mean, what about second-hand bicycles? Are they still really pricey?
There is definitely a great market in it. I heard some estimates the other day that there's something like 7 million bikes in people's sheds just locked up and in need of repair. But that's another barrier to cycle, is that repairing a cycle and getting it back on the road. So we do need a big national campaign to get all of those bikes out of people's sheds, get them fixed, and then donate them back to families. But of course, if you might not even have somewhere to store, if you're living in a high-rise flat, you don't have cycle storage, you don't have a safe place to store the bike. There's lots of reasons why children and families aren't able to have that kind of ongoing cycling. But we definitely want to give more children the opportunity, and we're now training record numbers of children. So giving them the opportunity to cycle, let's get them access to a cycle and then safe infrastructure so they can cycle with confidence.
I mean, that's such a good point about storage, because if you live in a flat like Frank Cottrell-Boyce remembered in his earlier years, you're quite right, you might want to cycle, but where are you going to keep the bikes? If you've got no hallway, if you've got no shed, if you've got no garage, then that's a real problem.
It certainly is, and we also know that from schools. I've been to schools in and across Cambridgeshire where they don't have access to any safe storage on site, so then parents can't cycle their children into the school gates either because there isn't a safe place to store their bikes. So it's a multi-solution. We need to really invest in the right facilities and infrastructure. We're lucky in Cambridgeshire particularly with the great infrastructure that we've got. So if you live in and around, I'm in the South Cambridgeshire villages, I can cycle pretty much all the way into Cambridge on brilliant infrastructure. So safe lanes, the National Cycle Network, and that just makes cycling so much more joyous when you're not in traffic. But equally through Bikeability, we can teach you. And, one of the other things that we see in through the British cycling research is that for women and girls particularly, cycle rates drop from the teen years off because of safety and traffic fears. I was a woman in that camp before I came to Bikeability. I did a Bikeability course, became the chief exec, absolutely loved it. Now I can boss it on the roads. And I would really encourage anyone who's just not confident to come on and do some time with our instructors because it will transform your cycling.
How do you teach kids if you've got, say, an 8-year-old who's never learned to ride a bike? Is the going way still to put them at the top of the hill, take the stabilisers off, give them a push and off they go? Or is it a bit more technical?
Well, we would say a bit more technical, but equally, we would definitely don't recommend stabilisers. Go balance all the way. It really improves their control skills from an early age. We know from research only 14% of parents feel confident to teach their children to cycle on the roads, and that's why Bikeability exists. That's why we're in schools making sure that we give those opportunities. But if you're a parent listening to this and you're thinking, how do I even start? Go to a place that is traffic free. Start in a park. Start in a place where there's not lots of people, so that their children don't have all over the other things to worry about. And to get them to balance first. So taking off the pedals if you haven't got a balance bike is a great tip. And starting them to stride. We play games with children where we do animal steps when they're first starting. So tiny little mouse steps up to big giant froggy leaps to start to get them to learn to glide and pedal, and then pedal with confidence.
Well, my producer, Tom, admitted earlier on that he's not the most confident cyclist, so maybe we need to get him along to do some tiny little mouse steps and then some big froggy leaps. Emily, thank you very much for your time this morning. Some lovely memories there and good recommendations as well from Emily Cherry, CEO of Bikeability. Right now, more on cycling. Apparently, riding a bike might be out of reach for children from the poorest families. This is according to new research. British Cycling found 97% of children from better off backgrounds can cycle, compared with 86% of youngsters from the least well off. It might mean there are 350,000 kids who would like to cycle but can't. Kieron McNab is a cycle trainer from the Bikeability Trust, who are based in Cottenham. Kieron, morning.
Morning, how you doing?
Yeah, very well, thank you. We're hearing people's memories of learning to ride a bike this morning. How did you get in the saddle?
I was a late bloomer, actually. I was not very keen to start with. I got to about the age, I think I was about 10 when I first learned to cycle. But yeah, just very nervous to start with, whereas now I'm pretty much an everyday cyclist.
And did you go straight on to a full-on two-wheel bike, no stabilisers?
I went down the traditional route of stabilisers and then onto two wheels. But since becoming a cycling instructor, I've actually noticed the benefit of pushing to teach people on balance bikes so they get used to developing the skill of balancing rather than relying on stabilisers to do that for them.
Everyone talks balance bikes these days. I don't think that balance bikes were around when I was younger. Maybe they were. But I did know some families who just took the pedals off ordinary bikes so that their kids could learn.
Yeah, I'd say that's the ideal route to go down. The big skill to develop when you learn to ride is the skill of balancing, and stabilisers obviously take that opportunity away to develop that.
So what about this research suggesting that there's kind of an income gap, like a wealth gap, when it comes to cycling proficiency among kids? Do you see that with the children that you train in Cambridgeshire?
Yeah, I think we do to a certain extent. It depends on the areas we're operating in, but generally, the vast majority of kids want to take part in Bikeability, which is the modern version of cycling proficiency. But the biggest barrier tends to be access to a roadworthy cycle. So either they don't have a cycle in the family they can use, or the cycle's been in the shed for ages and doesn't have working brakes, for example, and stuff like that. So there's a maintenance gap as well.
How much is a new kid's bike these days?
I mean, the costs can go up depending on where you shop. I mean, there's a huge market for second-hand cycles, and that's what we generally try and recommend. You don't have to go out and buy a brand new shiny bike, especially for a child who's more than likely going to go through several bikes in a few years. So shopping around trying to find second-hand bikes is something I'd recommend. And then there's also organisations online that do sort of a cycle loan scheme. So you can hire a bike for a set period of time, and then when your child grows out of that again, you can upgrade and loan the next size up bike.
What was your first bike, Kieron? Do you remember?
I had a mountain bike, which I absolutely loved. And yeah, it enabled me to go cycling wherever I wanted. So especially in parks, you could go on the path or go off-road on the grass. And yeah, those were my early memories of joy on a bike.
Oh, pulling wheelies and doing sick stunts, yeah. I'm sure, Kieron. That sounds like you. Yeah, it's a difficult thing. We heard earlier on from Emily, who was saying, you know, even if you can get hold of a bike, if you live, say, in a flat or in a property without any sort of storage, that can be a real barrier to learning to ride.
Yeah, you're increasingly finding that in more urban environments now, where you're obviously living in flats and stuff like that. And I guess the key from the cycling community is to try and push for better storage of cycles, so building the infrastructure for that. So making sure we've got secure bike stands that are easy to lock to, that are sheltered as well, to help with the maintenance side of it.
I wonder if there's a couple of other things going on. Do you think that just roads being busier nowadays puts parents off letting their kids onto bikes?
There's definitely a perception. I think that potentially comes from a lack of knowledge as well. So if you think back to when most parents received their cycle training, it would have been in the cycling proficiency days, which predominantly taught kids to ride either on the playground so they didn't experience traffic scenarios, or took them to the quietest junction in the area. What we're trying to do at Bikeability is educate children to cycle in traffic. So we progress them up from starting in fairly quiet areas to progressing to moderate levels of traffic. So what we're trying to do is educate them to interact with other road users, so they've got the confidence to do that independently afterwards. And we're hoping that in turn will encourage parents to let them cycle independently as well afterwards.
What about the state of the roads? You know, the number of potholes and divots in the fence, subsidence that we see. Do you think that has an effect?
I think it probably does. For a cyclist in particular, potholes can cause a massive hazard for them. And again, what we're trying to educate our cyclists to do when we're teaching kids in schools is to look ahead on the road and plan what's going on. So making sure you're aware of what's around. If you see a pothole, not necessarily sticking to the side of the road, but thinking about your road position and maybe moving out into the lane if you've got time and space to do so. So again, there's a big emphasis on looking at the road surface ahead and trying to plan what you're going to do as a cyclist.
What do you think's the sort of perfect age for learning to ride? Have you got kids, Kieron?
I've got a 1-year-old at the moment, and I've already got a balance bike brought for him, so I'm just waiting for him to walk at the moment, and then he'll be straight on that. Yeah, I mean, kids can start from any age. It's just be getting them enthusiastic about it, I think, and letting them play, and that's the intention I've got with my son Ollie, is to essentially hand the balance bike to him and let him explore and play with that and do it at his own speed, and see what happens from there.
Oh, wow. It'd be well funny if he can sort of cycle on his balance bike before he can properly walk.
Yeah, well, that's the aim. Whether it happens or not, we'll see. But that's my hope, is to pass on my enthusiasm to cycling to him.
The indoctrination starts early, Kieron. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Kieron McNab, cycle trainer from the Bikeability Trust, who are